This is the Steam Deck 1 year later. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to Deck Ready. I cannot believe that the Steam Deck has already been out for an entire year. Just like with the Nintendo Switch, they released this thing around my birthday. I think the official release of the Steam Deck was either February 24th or February 25th when people actually started getting it in their hands, but I thankfully was able to get one on day one, and I unboxed it here on the channel on my actual birthday. I had my best friend in town. We drove out to the office. I unboxed the Steam Deck, and then I took it to Disneyland and I took a picture with it at Galaxy's Edge. It was like an unforgettable day from top to bottom. And in that year, I have put so many hours into this device, and it's one of the only gaming handhelds in my adult life. Like, you know, when you're a kid, you get excited for gaming handhelds and then you love them. They exceed your expectations because you don't even know what to expect. Now that I'm like almost 30 years old, I'm actually turning 30 on Saturday, I have had a lot of game consoles. I've had a lot of PCs. They have to do something genuinely cool and interesting and new to really surprise me, and the Steam Deck totally surprised me over the past year. When I was going into this, I thought the Steam Deck would be a good device as like a supplement to my main gaming PC, but it actually lives alongside of it in the way that I thought the Nintendo Switch, back when that thing came out, would live alongside my PS4 and Xbox One X at the time. And what I mean by that is that while the Steam Deck is marketed as a device where you have games like Jedi Fallen Order, for example, that'll run really well on your main PC, but also run really well on the Steam Deck, and then you can take your save and transfer it back and forth. What I have really been using the Steam Deck for is games that just feel natively at home on the Steam Deck. I'm talking stuff like Hades, where I put like 50 or 60 hours into that game. There's a game called Zero Sievert, which is like top-down pixelated Tarkov, if you want to think of it like that. It's a raid mode game where you're a little pixelated dude and you go into an exclusion zone and hunt and find items and loot and try and make your way out and survive. I played Project Zomboid, which is a game that you wouldn't think would work on something like a Nintendo Switch, but having the back buttons and the totally remappable controls on the Steam Deck makes those 2D/3D graphics that don't look so great blown up on my massive monitor look amazing on an 8-inch handheld. I also play a ton of free horror games on the Steam Deck, like these smaller PS1 style experiences from people like Puppet Combo. I also just played a game called Missing Hiker, where it's like a 20-minute horror experience where your brother is missing out in the woods, and you go out into the woods and set up camp, and then you hear screaming and you make your way down a forest path into a house where you find a picture of yourself sleeping. Like, games like that are absolutely phenomenal on the Steam Deck because you can just start them up, they run perfectly, and they're like 15 to 20 minutes, so you can throw on a pair of headphones in bed and absolutely scare the out of yourself, which is exactly what I did. Another game that I started on PC but ended up completing on Steam Deck was Signalis. It's a top-down isometric survival horror game that makes it feel like you're playing an old Resident Evil, but it actually has a bunch of modern gameplay techniques implemented that just made it perfect to play on the Steam Deck thanks to its pixelated graphics. And then emulating games opens up a whole new, totally different experience on the Steam Deck that basically makes it the best emulation device on the market, using stuff like EmuDeck, which loads your games into Steam as actual Steam games and gives you the art alongside them, so it doesn't feel like you're doing anything weird or not correct with your Steam Deck. It feels like you're doing everything exactly how you're supposed to be doing. So playing stuff like Pokemon Soul Silver or Rock Band Unplugged on my Steam Deck was incredible. I mean, even after I beat God of War Ragnarok, I went right to God of War 2, and the two PSP games right there on my Steam Deck, and they all ran totally fine. And there are tons of other examples I could bring up, like when I watched Jackass Forever, I really wanted to play the old Tony Hawk games, and lo and behold, they run incredibly on the Steam Deck. It's basically the most versatile device out there because it's a gaming PC that's just in handheld form. And as far as the actual hardware itself goes, I would say it held up pretty well. I've just personally had a lot of accidental problems with this device. Of course, somehow throwing my backpack into my car broke the left bumper on the Steam Deck. I had to send it out to Valve. They fixed it extremely quickly and got it back to me, and then unfortunately, I had my Steam Deck on my couch. It was sitting there for a couple days, the case closed, and then I went to grab it, and then it fell out of the case and the same bumper broke. That experience was not so great because I had to go through Valve's new hardware partner, United Radio. They are looking for things to charge you for when repairing your Steam Deck, and if you look up United Radio, they're the same people who repair Nintendo Switches and Joy-Cons, and there are so many horror stories out there of people sending in Joy-Cons, like special edition ones, and getting like launch unit Joy-Cons back back or United Radio losing their stuff or overcharging them. And it looks like they're doing the same thing with the Steam Deck, because if you look at the Steam Deck subreddit, there's tons of horror stories there already, and Valve's only been working with United Radio for a couple of months. So while yeah, that experience did suck, that was totally my fault. Like, I dropped the Steam Deck right onto the ground, and I don't feel like any gaming device except for the indestructible Nintendo DS would ever survive a fall like that. But you know, the first repair I had was great, so it's like your mileage may vary of a situation there. But outside of that, the hardware has been absolutely incredible. My launch Steam Deck had a little bit of screen bleed. I was able to get that fixed by Valve. The screen itself is still looking nice and crisp. The color is great on there. Of course, a lot of people want an OLED screen, but you can use plugins to make the screen look even better. Overall, I think the form factor and the resolution is totally fine, especially when you're using stuff like FSR 2.1, which in the past year, FSR has gotten completely, totally better. Like, I remember making Steam Deck videos back before this thing came out, and I was like saying there's a clear difference between NVIDIA's DLSS and FSR. Even though they're not the exact same technology, they're basically trying to get you to the same end goal. And now, a year later, FSR is completely different, and the games that support the latest version, it's not totally one-to-one with DLSS, especially if you compare it to DLSS 3, but it's close enough, and it makes it a viable option on the Steam Deck, which, again, is another important reason why the Steam Deck is so awesome. The buttons themselves have also totally held up on my device, whether it's the touchpad, the D-pad, the face buttons, the bumpers when I'm not dropping them on the ground, or the triggers, or even the back buttons. Everything is just as clicky and works just as well as it did day one. I've seen some people who have had their thumbsticks pop out because it's only like a half dome, so the bottom of the half dome pops out, and apparently that's pretty easy to fix. Thankfully, that hasn't happened to me, and as someone who's opened up my Steam Deck a bunch of times, I've had no issues with it, even with this aftermarket Microsoft Surface SSD that I put in there a couple months ago. That is still working completely fine, and the 1TB SD card I put in there works just as good as it did the day I got it as well. The one area where the Steam Deck is still just a little bit messy though is with the software. I mean, if you compare it where it is now to where it is when that thing came out, it like night and day does not cover how much better SteamOS 3.0 works now versus when it came out. There were tons of errors with the operating system when I first got my Steam Deck, like it would totally hang, the sound would cut out, they would just have a black screen sometimes, and I'd have to hard reset the Steam Deck. If you use certain docks with the Steam Deck, it would just put it on a black screen, and you basically had to use the recovery image to completely start from scratch. I did mess up the operating system a couple of times trying to install the Resident Evil 4 HD texture pack. That somehow just broke SteamOS for me, and I had to completely wipe my device. But no matter what I did to this thing, no matter what I threw at it, no matter how many times I took it apart, the software still was able to get back to exactly as it was on day one, with all the patches, of course, that came along with Steam Deck updates. And I think that's yet another positive point of the Steam Deck. You can screw with it all you want, but there's really not a lot of ways where you can completely brick your device. I'm sure there are plenty of ways if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty side of things, but for me personally, someone who I would say has a medium tinkering level capacity with stuff like this, I have had no trouble resetting the Steam Deck if I really take it past the point of no return. And I just mentioned docks, so now we should talk about accessories, because just like with the Nintendo Switch, the accessory scene for the Steam Deck over the past year has completely blown up. There's so much stuff you can buy for this handheld that's either genuinely useful or just really weird and kind of interesting. In the kind of interesting and really weird camp, I would definitely put the JSOX dock that allows you to install an external SSD, because while yes, it does have utility, it kind of has extremely limited utility because you're only going to use that extra SSD when you have the Steam Deck docked. But again, that option is there if you're someone who needs that extra storage and you're using your Steam Deck as a desktop PC. In terms of utility though, there is a dock for anything you want to do on the Steam Deck, and you can get them from multiple different manufacturers. I already mentioned JSOX, they've sponsored the channel a bunch of times. There's iVolar. Of course, the official Steam Deck dock is my preferred dock for the console. I understand that it's plastic and the build quality is a little less good than something like you'd get from JSOX, which is like completely aluminum, but having an official option that gets firmware updates from Valve and works totally fine out of the box with everything you throw at it and has any port you could ever dream of, that's a pretty cool option. And of course, it is a little expensive, but it does come along with an extra Steam Deck charger, which I love. And overall, I have used my Steam Deck docked way more than I thought I would. When I go home to Michigan for 4th of July, I usually go home for like a week, and we go out to this house my parents parents have in the woods. It's definitely a cabin out in the woods, so it doesn't have internet, so we usually download a bunch of movies before going out there and play them off of my iPad on the TV. But last year I didn't have my iPad, so I downloaded all the movies onto my Steam Deck, and I used my Steam Deck dock, the JSOX one at the time, to plug my Steam Deck into the TV, and then it just worked totally fine. I watched all my movies there, and it was great. Honestly, the only app I can think of on the Steam Deck that it doesn't have that I really want is Apple Music. I use Apple Music on my iPhone and on my PC now that Windows 11 includes it, but even with stuff like that, where there isn't an official app on the Linux store that you have on the Steam Deck, you can just find a different version of it, like this app called Cider, which is technically a web interface for Apple Music, so you can't download your playlists, but I've used it quite a few times to just stream music over the internet when I'm at home and I'm playing some games that don't really need me to pay attention to what's happening in the game. But going back to accessories for the Steam Deck, another one I've really liked trying out is the Project Kill Switch, the new one that doesn't mess with the fans inside your device. It has a really cool kickstand included on it. JSOX makes their own competitor to that really is just the kitchen sink approach. I did a video on both cases on the channel a couple weeks ago if you want to go check that out. And then JSOX made a replaceable back for the Steam Deck that has a heat sink attached to it. They make a bunch of different transparent colors that match up with the N64 and Game Boy Color see-through variants that they used to have when I was a kid. So no matter what, because the Steam Deck is a PC that was made to be worked on and tinkered with, the accessory game is totally nuts just a year in, whereas it took a little while for that to happen with the Nintendo Switch. And I'd say that the Steam Deck's accessories have a lot more versatility and usability than what we saw with the Nintendo Switch. So yeah, that basically covers everything I looked at, I think, over the past year of the Steam Deck. But now we should talk about the future, because Valve has said that they're just getting started with this device, which is awesome, right? Like, a lot of people were scared that if this thing didn't catch on, like the Steam machines, Valve would kind of move on to the next thing. But the Steam Deck totally caught on because it's such a great device, and now you can actually order it. There's no waiting period, which makes it even easier. And we've heard Valve speak about a Steam Deck 2 in interviews, and I think the approach they're allegedly going to take is super smart. They're not going to really upgrade anything internally on the device. They're just going to refine it. So things like a better screen, improved buttons, maybe making the thing thinner, maybe making the bezels smaller, just basically all of the fine tuning stuff that people have been asking for over the past year. It feels like we were testing this thing to get the ultimate Steam Deck in maybe next year or the year after, or maybe it could come out this year. But either way, I'm excited for it because I have the peace of mind knowing that I'm not ruining it for someone else who may have just gotten the Steam Deck, because from a performance standpoint, it's allegedly going to be exactly the same on the inside. So thinking something more like the Switch OLED and the Nintendo Switch versus like the PSP and the PS Vita. Of course, we've heard tons of rumors that Valve is working on games that are going to be working on both the Steam Deck and big gaming PCs, and they're going to have multiplayer that works on both devices. I would love to see that coming out. We've seen a lot of publishers like Sony and Square Enix making their games verified for the Steam Deck at launch. I would really like to see more developers do that. And then of course, finally, I really want Valve to A, release SteamOS 3.0 so I can install it on my main gaming PC, and B, finally let us dual boot Windows on the Steam Deck, because now, a year after, the absence of games like Destiny 2 and Dead by Daylight and some other online games that are some of the biggest games on Steam, that is still a big gap that I think needs to be filled in some way, and it doesn't look like Bungie is ever going to make Destiny 2 work on the Steam Deck, despite the fact that Sony owns them now, and Sony has been totally supportive of the Steam Deck. I don't want to get into it. I just really want dual booting into Windows because I played Destiny 2 off of a micro SD card. It runs great on the Steam Deck. I want an official way to play it where I can have a partition on my SSD that has Windows 11 so I can boot into that and play games where Easy Anti-Cheat or BattleEye or whatever other online anti-cheat software is stopping a lot of these games from working just works totally fine. Because with Lightfall coming out, I'm about to be grinding a bunch in Destiny, and having that on a handheld would be great. So yeah, it's been an awesome year with the Steam Deck. I love it as a handheld. I love it as a portable PC. I love it as a desktop PC. I'm glad Valve is sticking with it, and I cannot wait to see where it goes in the future.